What's good, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, and I just wanted to cover last night fight. Shout out to everyone that was here last night on the live. Steven Nelson and Diego Pacheco. It was a decent fight. It had some good moments. It definitely picked up in the second half of that fight. But Diego Pacheco went on to win a unanimous decision, all three cards, 117, 111 against Steven Nelson. How do I feel about the cards? I thought they were a little bit wide. I know I kind of predicted a 117, 111 card, but I didn't expect all three cards to have that. I thought it was more like 115, 113, or 116, 112, you know. But it was pretty clear that Pacheco won the fight. Um, so, you know, going through the fight, I can tell you that the first 5 rounds were kind of slow. No one was really in control of the fight in the first 5 rounds. It was very few punches thrown in those rounds from both. I think Steven Nelson was definitely the more active fighter. A lot of upper body movement, a lot of in and outs. Not really throwing many power shots in there. Every once in a while he would throw some sneaky overhand rights. But I think Pacheco did a good job and keeping in a rangy fight, getting in and out of distance, and rolling the punches off his shoulders. So for defensively, I think he did a decent job. But the first 5 rounds, it just seemed like Pacheco took it easy. I think he really wanted to just pace himself. It was his first 12-round fight, and I think they went in this fight wanting to just make sure he didn't burn himself out. Whereas Steven Nelson was more irky jerky, a lot of feints, a lot of upper body movements, a lot of just in and out, but he wasn't throwing anything with much power behind it, throughout the fight really. It was very, very rare. But Steven Nelson definitely struggled with distance. There was just times where he was just shooting right hands and he's like way too far, out of range to even come close to landing any of these punches. And partly due because of Diego Pacheco's distance. Like he did a good job at keeping it a rangy fight for the most part. So the first 5 rounds, being that I think the first, the third, and the fifth rounds were pretty close rounds between the two. It was very difficult to score those 3 rounds. They were really swing rounds only because it wasn't that competitive. It was not, has nothing to do with it not being competitive. It was just not enough activity from neither. Steve was landing more jabs and was touching Pacheco to the body with right hands, but he wasn't really putting much power behind it. You know what I mean? And Pacheco seemed like in those earlier rounds, it seems like he was trying to steal rounds. He would finish strong in the last minute or the last 30 seconds of each round by being aggressive. But it wasn't until the sixth round, and I don't remember which round Pacheco did get a full extension on that right hand and cut Steven Nelson. I know it was in the first half of the fight, but I can't remember which round. But the sixth round was the first really clear round between the both of them. I think Pacheco really was the aggressive fighter at that point, and it seemed like Steven Nelson started to get a little tired. And I want to say from the sixth to like maybe the 10th round, I think Pacheco was in pretty much control of the fight. I still thought he was pacing himself, and I still thought like he wasn't fighting reckless, but he was definitely the aggressor. And it seems like Steve started fading a little bit in those rounds from the sixth to the 10th rounds. And then the 11th round happened, and like Steve Nelson, started fighting like as if he knew he was down and he really wanted to go out there and win the fight and come back and win. And he outworked Diego Pacheco in the 11th round. I think he caught a second win. And as we were watching a live, I noticed that Diego Pacheco looked up at the clock, one of the periods where he was tied up with Steven Nelson. And at that point, I realized that Pacheco just wanted to get the fight over with. Like he was tired, you know what I mean? And I know a lot of people were saying Steven Nelson's 36 years old, yada, yada, yada. But This is why when it came to like even the breakdowns, there's a lot of unknowns about this guy. Yes, he is much older, but who has the better cardio between the two, especially because he's coming from a good camp. You know, he's with Bomac, he's with Bud. I knew that strategically they was going to come in with a decent game plan. Plus, we didn't know how durable the guy is. He did take some big shots from Pacheco, but he didn't go down at all. You know, he got buzzed with a couple good shots, but he never was really, really hurt really bad, you know? But that 11th round was like, okay, Steven Nelson came back strong. He showed a lot of heart, but then the 12th round happened, and Steve Nelson just went off in that 12th round, you know, and had some huge moments. And he was hitting Pacheco so with some really, really big shots. And, you know, there was a point here that I was like, whoa, like what's happening right now? You know, Pacheco might go down from one of these shots because he was getting hit with huge shots. And again, there was two periods in that 12th round where they were tied up and Pacheco just looked up at the clock again two more times in that 12th round. And I called it out last night. And I said, I don't like this, you know, because you're 23 years old, and, you know, and these are the fights where you want to make a statement. You know, I know Steve Nelson is not like a household name, but coming at the coming straight out of the camp he's coming from, you know, being undefeated, you know, I thought the style was more beatable for Pacheco than a Sean McCollum, you know, who I brought up in the breakdown. You know, I thought that Sean McCollum was based on what I've seen between Pacheco's fight with McCollum and what I've seen from Steven, I thought Sean was just more twitchy or better, you know, longer arms, better counter puncher, comfortable fighting in the back foot. Uh, I thought he was a better boxer than Steven Nelson. But one thing about, you know, Steven Nelson, he showed the heart. You know, he had the better conditioning. You know, he was in better fitness to me. And I was shocked at how burnt out Pacheco was. You know, and this is why when it comes to these highlights and guys, as some guys are really good at beating guys at the lower level and make it look amazing when they do it. You know, it's no different from Andy Cruz. You know, Andy Cruz fought on the card as well. And he's a perfect example because he stepped up in his last two fights. You know, and we're not even at the top contender level at 135, but the last two fights, Moran and Cruz, not Cruz, I forgot who he fought last time. But anyway, the last two fights, he stepped up in opposition. And the fights have been much more competitive, you know? And I feel like Diego Pacheco, yeah, he's got a name. He has a good buzz. He comes from a good camp as well. But at the end of the day, he really didn't look that impressive to me. You know, and his name is already being mentioned with guys like Canelo, like Christian Mbili, like Edgar Berlanga, Caleb Plant, you know. His name is being mentioned in there with those guys. But based on his performance from this fight, his performance with last year with McCallman, I'm like, he's good. I don't know if it's is he struggling to make weight. I mean, I seen him at the weigh-in. He looked strong, and it didn't look like his face was sunken in. But maybe, you know, they need to get maybe, you know, some people mention maybe train coaches. You know, I'm not gonna go that far, but maybe get a better strength and conditioning coach in there. Get someone that's gonna improve your fitness. You know, because he just for a young guy, he just looked burnt out by the older guy that was really unproven as well. You know, so I think Pacheco definitely won. I'm leaning towards more like a 116, 112 card for me. Um, but it was a competitive fight. It was. It was. It definitely had moments where it was pretty competitive, especially in those last two rounds, the sixth round, and you know some of the other rounds. But with Pacheco, he looks very beatable. I see that Edgar Berlanga has already called him out. Uh, and look, I want to talk about that one thing. I just want to go down like I compiled a little list. Obviously, I haven't seen every one of these guys at well, the guys on the list I've seen, but there are other guys when I looked at the rankings that I'm not as familiar with, so I might have not brought them up. But feel free to bring up other names if I didn't bring them up. But the way I look at 168. Canelo is obviously the top dog, right? We know that already. Like Canelo's top dog. He's holding three of the belts. William Skull is holding that IBF belt that Canelo once had, right? So there's a good chance that we might get another undisputed fight soon with between Canelo and William Skull. It's very, very possible. All right. Um, but then you have the top contenders, and when I put the top contenders, you got Christian Mbili, he's already in position to fight for a title. You know what I mean? So he's top dude. You have Caleb Plant, who's former champion, but he's clearly still a top dude in the division. He's a top name there, right? And then you have Edgar Berlanga, who hasn't been champion yet, but he's already been in there with Canelo. He's already been in there with a pay per view. He has a big name. You know what I mean? So he's already made a statement after Pacheco's performance, and that's a possibility. That's a possible fight in the future. And then you have Jaime Munguia. I know he got knocked out by Sriracha, and I know he's having his rematch. If Jaime happens to win that fight, I can see that's still a name there that I can see anyone wanting to fight, whether it's Balanga or Pacheco or Plant. Jaime Munguia is going to be a name that people are always going to want to fight. You know what I mean? So these are names that if you get the phone call, you take. Whether we think he's ready or not, these are realistic fights that I would expect for Diego Pacheco to take if he gets the phone call, right? Because there's so much to gain and the risk is worth the reward. You'll get paid and you'll be in position to fight for a title soon. Now, this one man is a top contender and possibly capable of beating all of these guys. But he's high risk, very low reward. He's not famous, but I believe Aslis Iglesias is probably the most dangerous fighter at 168 that no one talks about because he's not really known. He's a Cuban fighter. He was here during the time Morrell was down there. Benavidez was down there. He was there too. It's just that his name doesn't come up like that because not a lot of people have seen him. I've seen him a few times. That's not a fight that I would expect Pacheco and his team would want. There's not much to gain there. The real ones would respect it, but there's not many people that know who Iglesias is. All right, but I think that would probably be the most high-risk fight with the lowest reward. And I think that guy would actually beat Pacheco without a doubt, in my opinion. So I'm not saying to avoid him because I like good quality fights, but I expect that guy to be avoided by everyone, at least unless they have to fight him as a Mando type situation. You know what I mean? And then the realistic fights for me moving forward for Pacheco, if he can't get some of those top names, I expect a fight with Bektemir Murdazaliev. All right. I expect that fight. I know he got knocked out by Gabe Rosado some years back, but he's picked up a bunch of wins since then. And he still hasn't really got a shot at a big fighter. He definitely has the worst defensive flaws out there, but he's a huge puncher, you know what I mean? And he brings a good fight. That fight would be a good fight for Diego. I know Sergey Deverenchenko is very old, all right? But for whatever reason, he still is giving fighters hell in these fights. He gave Jaime Munguia hell after I thought he was washed up. He even gave Christian Mbili a tough fight recently, and he doesn't have the legs like that anymore, but he was still able to give Mbili a tough fight. I expect him to get a phone call because that is what Sergey Deverenchenko has been since probably the Triple G fight. He's going to get the call to get the fight because he's beatable, but he's a tough time. You know what I mean? Kyrone Davis is another fighter that I think is a tough fight. He's been in there with a lot of guys. He's been in there with Benavidez. He recently beat who did he recently beat? That was kind of like an upset. Uh, but anyway, Kyron Davis is another fighter that I think is a good fight, a good boxer, okay, that can make you improve as a fighter. And if you are not on your A game, that can possibly beat you by outboxing you. You know what I mean? So he's been in there with a lot of top dudes. I just think that that would be a realistic fight for Diego Pacheco. Um, Also Trevor McCumbee, I brought him up last night. I know there's only one fight that we know him from, and it's the Caleb Plant fight recently. Extremely powerful fighter. You know what I mean? Caleb really, really was in desperate trouble in that fight, and he had to turn into a dog in order to win, and it actually worked out for him. But Trevor McCumbee is definitely dangerous, and I think he's definitely worth a shot. Even some of these names that I'm listing here that I'm saying that are real, reasonable fights. These are some of the fights that Steven Nelson could get involved in too. Because now that he proved that he can at least hang with a top prospect soon, top contender type of guy, um, he's probably going to get more opportunities as well. So some of these fights are good for Steven Nelson. I said Steven Nelson against Trevor McCumbee, two kind of unknown guys. Now they're known because of their recent performances, even though those was losses. I think those fights would be good. Demetrius Andre, I'm always gonna bring him up. I would love for him to Jamal Charlo to fight each other, but I don't know what Andre is doing. We haven't seen him since he lost to David Benavidez, and that would be a good fight for Pacheco. That's not going to be an easy fight. It's going to be a risky fight, but it's still a decent fight against a former two division champion. You know what I mean? And then last but not least, I threw Shane Mosley Jr. on there. I believe he's fighting at 168 now. I know he beat Danny Jacobs. I know Danny's much older now, but he beat him at 168. So I don't know if he's going back down to middleweight or not, but it's a name. It's someone that has looked good in his more recent years. I think Shane Mosley Jr. took a while for him to really pick it up, but I think he's looked better in his most recent years. So these are realistic fights, and also with Steve Nelson, I think these level of fights would be good for anyone that is trying to get in position to fight for a top contender, not a champion, but a top contender. All right, so that's my thoughts and recap of the fight, and as far as with Diego moving forward, I think he needs some more fights. I think overall, I know he called out Canelo last night. I mean, everyone's gonna do it. I think it's just good promo to call out Canelo. But at the end of the day, he's not on that level, and I still want to see if he's on a level as some of the other top contenders that I just made, like name. Again, I loved. I've seen what he was able to do. I love the uppercut. I got a lot. I think that was his best shot in the fight. This was a shot that I brought up in a breakdown that Steven Nelson, who comes straight in, he was able to time Nelson at times and catch him with the uppercut. But it didn't seem like Nelson was really, really phased by his power like that. Like Nelson was a pretty durable guy. You know what I mean? And that may be an issue when he fights these other top guys at 168. So overall, he still looks good, but I think he needs more fights. And obviously, if he gets a call to fight Edgar, he'll probably take it. But I do honestly believe he needs more fights. All right. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. Please subscribe to the channel, smash the like button. All right. Shout out to everyone that's been supporting. I do appreciate your donations on Cash App and everything. I appreciate that. And I'll see you guys on the very next video. I am working on Fulton and Figueroa for you guys. Hopefully by tomorrow, I'll have it out for you. All right. Peace.